The handcuffs felt cold, but my husband's eyes were colder. "You're under arrest," the officer said, "for leaving a child in the car." I looked at Julian, waiting for him to tell the truth, that it was he who left our son in that SUV. Instead, he wiped a fake tear and whispered, "Officer, she's been drinking. She just forgot." In that moment, the perfect wife died. Julian thinks I'm just a social accessory he rescued from a diner. He doesn't know that every billion-dollar trade he ever made was mine. He doesn't know I am Vesper, the anonymous ghost who wrote every line of code that built his empire. He took the house and my dignity, but I am the algorithm, and I just hit delete. Subscribe to see how I dismantled a billionaire's life, one line of code at a time. The blue glow of 3 computer monitors reflected in Elena Vance's glasses as she sat in the dim light of her home office. On the screens, complex lines of code and fluctuating stock tickers danced in a rhythm only she truly understood. With a few precise keystrokes, she corrected a disastrous trade that would have cost Thorne Capital millions by morning. A heavy door clicked open behind her. Elena quickly minimized her windows, replacing the high-level financial data with a simple spreadsheet for the local PTA bake sale. "Still playing with your little budget, Elle?" Julian's voice was smooth, carrying the faint scent of expensive bourbon. He leaned against the doorframe, his tuxedo jacket perfectly tailored to his broad shoulders. He didn't wait for an answer. "Hurry up. The car is waiting. This gala is the biggest night of my career, and I need my wife looking the part." "I'm almost ready, Julian," Elena said softly, her voice steady and controlled. She stood up, smoothing out her silk gown. Julian walked over, tucking a stray strand of hair behind her ear. His touch was cold. "You look perfect. Just remember to smile and let me do the talking. Nobody at this party wants to hear about spreadsheets. They want to see the woman lucky enough to be Mrs. Thorne." Elena offered a practiced, muted smile. For 6 years, she had been her lucky charm. She had stayed in the shadows, letting him take the credit for the proprietary algorithms she had written, the very code that had made him a billionaire. To the world, she was a quiet, modest, stay-at-home mother. To Julian, she was a social accessory. The gala at their Connecticut estate was a sea of glittering diamonds and sharp suits. Julian was in his element, holding court in the center of the ballroom. He stayed close to Clara, a sharp-featured PR socialite who laughed a little too loudly at his jokes. "Elena, darling," Clara purred, glancing at Elena's modest jewelry. "Julian was just telling us how you managed to find the most charming little preschool for Jamie. It's so sweet how you handle all those domestic details, so he can focus on the empire." Elena nodded politely, her mind elsewhere. "Speaking of Jamie, Julian, where is he? I thought you were watching him while I spoke with the caterer." Julian waved a dismissive hand, his eyes never leaving Clara. "He's fine. He was getting cranky, so I took him out to the SUV for some air. He probably fell asleep. I'll check on him in a minute." The minute turned into 20, then 30. Elena felt a prickle of unease at the back of her neck. She pushed through the crowd, heading towards the entrance, but she was stopped by the sound of heavy footsteps. The massive oak doors of the ballroom swung open, but it wasn't more guests. 2 police officers walked in, their faces grim. The music died down as the high society crowd began to whisper. One officer looked around the room until his eyes landed on Julian and Elena. "Julian Thorne?" the officer asked. Julian stepped forward, his charming CEO mask firmly in place. "Officers, is there a problem? A noise complaint, perhaps?" "We found a 4-year-old boy locked in a black SUV in the parking lot," the officer said loudly. A collective gasp rippled through the room. "The windows were up and the engine was off. He's with the paramedics now." Julian's face went pale, but only for a second. Before Elena could even scream her son's name, Julian turned to Elena. His hand reached into his own pocket, then he lunged forward, grabbing Elena's designer clutch. He fumbled with it for a heartbeat before pulling out a set of car keys. "Elena," Julian's voice broke with a sob that sounded terrifyingly real. He looked at the police, then back at his wife with a look of pure, manufactured horror. He looked at the officers, wiping a fake tear from his eye. "Officer, please, she's been drinking champagne all night. I think she forgot." The room spun. Elena looked at the keys in Julian's hand, then at the smirk hidden behind Clara's manicured hand. The handcuffs felt cold as they snapped around Elena's wrists, but her heart was colder. As the police led her out past the judgmental stares of her peers, Elena didn't cry, she didn't scream. She looked back at Julian, who was currently being comforted by Clara. In that moment, the soft, supportive wife died. The architect remained. The fluorescent lights of the holding cell hummed with a low, irritating buzz that grated against the silence. Elena sat on the narrow metal bench, her silk gala dress looking absurdly out of place against the cinder-block walls. She didn't cry, and she didn't pace. Instead, she closed her eyes and visualized a chessboard. Julian had made his opening move. It was clumsy, cruel, and relied entirely on the assumption that she was helpless. A guard rapped on the bars. "Vance, your lawyer is here." Elena stood up, smoothing her skirt. She knew Julian hadn't sent a lawyer. He wanted her to sit here and stew until he could play the hero or the grieving victim. When she entered the small consultation room, she wasn't surprised to see a man she recognized from the city's top-tier legal circles, a man Julian could never afford. "Miss Vance," the lawyer said, sliding a tablet across the table. "The bail has been posted from an offshore account associated with the Vesper holdings. The car is waiting outside." "Thank you, Marcus," Elena said, her voice sounding foreign in the small room. It was the woman who ran the numbers, not the woman who hosted tea parties. "Did you secure the medical reports for my son?" "Jamie is fine. He's back at the house with the nanny. Julian is already spinning the story to the press. He's framing this as a tragic mental health crisis brought on by the pressures of your domestic life." Elena felt a cold flash of anger, but she suppressed it. Let him talk. It only makes the fall longer. 3 hours later, Elena walked into the Thorne mansion. The air was thick with the scent of lilies and expensive floor wax. Julian was in the study, a glass of scotch in his hand, looking out at the manicured lawn. He didn't turn around when she entered. "I didn't expect you back so soon," he said, his tone dripping with fake disappointment. "I was going to come get you in the morning, after I'd handled the PR team. You've made a mess of things, Elena." "You've made a mess?" Elena walked to the desk. She saw a stack of papers waiting there. Divorce documents. Julian turned, his face hardening into a sneer. "The board is spooked. Having a wife who forgets her child in a car is a liability. I've drafted an agreement. You'll get a small monthly allowance and the cottage in upstate. In exchange, you give me full custody and disappear. If you fight me, I'll use every witness at that party to prove you're unstable." He pushed a pen toward her. He expected a breakdown. He expected her to beg for Jamie, to cry for mercy. Elena picked up the pen. She didn't even look at the settlement amount. She knew Julian had stripped the accounts, leaving her with what he thought was a meager pittance. He didn't realize that the money in those accounts was just the tip of the iceberg. She signed her name with a firm, elegant flourish. "There," she said, sliding the papers back. "I want to see Jamie. I'll be gone by morning." Julian smirked, his ego visible in the way he relaxed his shoulders. "I knew you'd be reasonable. You always were a smart girl, Elle. Not smart enough to run a company, but smart enough to know when you've lost." Elena walked toward the door, then stopped. You should check the overnight Asian markets, Julian. The volatility is spiking. I have my analysts for that. He dismissed her with a wave of his hand. Elena left the room without another word. She went upstairs, woke her son, and quietly packed their essentials. As she drove away from the estate in a car Julian didn't know she owned, she pulled over and opened her laptop. With 3 keystrokes, she deactivated the autocorrect protocol on Julian's primary trading algorithm. For years, her code had been silently fixing his mistakes in real time. Now, the machine was truly his. By the time she reached her new loft in Manhattan, the sun was beginning to rise. Elena looked out at the skyline, her reflection in the glass looking sharper, colder. Her phone buzzed with a news alert. Thorne Capital faces unexpected pre-market losses. Elena smiled. It was a small, predatory expression. The debt is officially due, Julian, Elena whispered to the empty room. She picked up her phone and dialed a number she had memorized years ago. It picked up on the first ring. Sterling, a deep, gravelly voice answered. Leo, Elena said. It's Vesper. I'm ready to come in from the cold. The morning air in Manhattan tasted of rain and exhaust, a sharp contrast to the suffocating scent of lilies back in Connecticut. Elena stood on the balcony of her new loft, a glass of black coffee in her hand. Below, the city moved in a chaotic, beautiful pattern that only she could see the logic in. She wasn't just a mother or a wife anymore. She was a woman who'd spent 6 years building a throne for a man who didn't deserve to sit on it. A chime echoed through the minimalist space. Elena set her coffee down and opened the door. Leo Sterling stood in the hallway. He was taller than Julian, with a presence that didn't need to loud talk or flex. He wore a charcoal suit that cost more than most people's cars, but he wore it like armor, not a costume. He looked at Elena, his dark eyes scanning her new, sharp silhouette. Gone were the soft cardigans and the supportive wife smile. She wore a tailored black blazer and trousers, her hair pulled back into a sleek, low bun. You look different, Vesper, Leo said, his voice a low rumble. I look like myself, Elena replied, stepping aside to let him in. Did you bring the data? Leo walked to the center of the room, placing a secure data drive on the marble kitchen island. Elena's face glowed in the blue light of a laptop screen showing falling stocks. The tension between them was thick. The hunt had finally begun. Thorne Capital had its worst morning in history. The market opened and Julian's primary fund dropped 4% in 90 minutes. The street is calling it a glitch. I suspect you know exactly what kind of glitch it is. Elena sat at her laptop, her fingers flying across the keys. The blue light reflected in her eyes as she pulled up the live trading floor data. It's not a glitch, it's the truth. Julian never understood the math behind my vortex algorithm. He thought he could just point it at a sector and it would print money. Without my manual overrides, the code is cannibalizing his own positions. He's desperate, Elena, Leo warned, leaning against the counter. He's been calling every major firm in the city looking for a bridge loan. He's telling people you had a breakdown and stole a portion of the company's operating capital. Elena didn't flinch. She didn't even look up. Let him lie. Every lie he tells is another nail in the coffin of his reputation. By the time he realizes the money isn't missing, that it simply never existed without my corrections, it will be too late. She turned the screen toward Leo. A complex map of shell companies and debt acquisitions glowed on the monitor. I'm not just watching him fail, Leo. I'm buying his debt. Every time his stock dips, I buy another piece of him through a series of anonymous holding companies. I want 51% of Thorne Capital before the month is over. Leo looked at the screen, then back at the woman he had only ever seen standing 2 steps behind Julian Thorne. He saw the cold, brilliant fire in her eyes. You're not just looking for a divorce settlement, you're looking for an execution. I'm looking for what's mine. Just then, Elena's phone buzzed on the table. The caller ID showed Julian's name. She let it vibrate against the marble, the sound harsh in the quiet room. "Aren't you going to answer?" Leo asked. "Not yet," Elena said, her voice calm and steady. "I want him to feel the silence first. I want him to realize that the person who always fixed his life is no longer on the other end of the line." The phone stopped, then immediately started again. This time, a text message flashed on the screen. "Julian, Elena, stop this nonsense. The board is asking questions. I need the access codes to the secondary server. Now." Elena picked up the phone, her thumb hovering over the screen. She didn't send the codes. Instead, she sent a single, cryptic sentence that she knew would keep him awake all night. "The ghost has left the machine, Julian. Good luck with the opening bell." She set the phone down and looked at Leo. "There's an industry gala on Friday night, the Founders Circle. Julian is the keynote speaker." Leo tilted his head. "He'll be expecting you to be hiding in a hole somewhere, nursing your reputation." "Then I shouldn't disappoint him," Elena said, a small, dangerous smile touching her lips. "I'll be there, but I won't be his wife, and I won't be sitting in the back of the room." Elena stood before the floor-to-ceiling mirror in her loft, adjusting the cuffs of her structured black blazer. The fabric was crisp, the lines architectural and sharp, a far cry from the soft, flowing floral dresses Julian had always insisted she wear. She looked at her reflection and didn't see a victim, she saw a strategist. "The car is downstairs," Leo said, leaning against the doorframe. He was dressed in a perfectly tailored tuxedo, watching her with a quiet, observant intensity. "Are you sure about this? Once you walk through those doors, there's no going back to the shadows." Elena picked up a minimalist silver clutch, the only accessory she needed. "I've spent 6 years in the shadows, Leo. I'm tired of the dark. It's time Julian sees exactly who was keeping the lights on." The St. Regis ballroom was a cathedral of gold leaf and crystal. As Elena and Leo entered, a hush rippled through the room. It wasn't the kind of silence that greeted a scandal, it was the silence of confusion. The elite of Manhattan's financial world whispered behind their hands, trying to reconcile the erratic ex-wife they had read about in the tabloids with the commanding woman walking beside the city's most formidable investor. Across the room, Julian was holding a glass of champagne, his arm draped possessively around Clara. He was mid-laugh when he spotted them. The color drained from his face, replaced quickly by a mask of cold fury. He whispered something to Clara and began weaving through the crowd towards them. "Elena," Julian said, his voice a low, dangerous hiss as he reached them. "What are you doing here? This isn't a PTA meeting. You're trespassing on a world you don't belong to." Elena didn't flinch. She didn't even look at his hand when he reached out to grab her arm. Leo stepped forward just enough to make Julian hesitate. "Actually, Julian," Elena said, her voice calm and clear enough for those nearby to hear, "I'm here as a consultant for Sterling Investments. I believe your board invited us." Clara let out a sharp, mocking laugh. "A consultant? Darling, knowing how to balance a checkbook for a household doesn't make you a financial expert. You're embarrassing yourself." Elena finally turned her gaze to Clara, her expression unreadable. "I wasn't talking to the PR department, Clara. I was talking to the man whose firm just lost 20% of their market cap in 48 hours. Julian's jaw tightened. "A temporary market fluctuation. My analysts are already correcting it." Your analysts are chasing ghosts, Julian, Elena said, her tone conversational, as if they were discussing the weather. You're going long on tech-heavy futures, while the interest rates are prepping for a hawkish pivot. You're over-leveraged by a factor of 3. If you don't dump your positions in the next 20 minutes, Thorne Capital won't just be bleeding, it'll be extinct. The circle of onlookers grew larger. Julian's ego was being stripped bare in front of his peers. You don't know what you're talking about. You're a waitress I picked up from a diner. I was the girl who built your engine, Elena said softly, stepping closer so only he could hear her. And I took the spark plugs when I left. Look at your phone, Julian. The London Exchange just opened. As if on cue, Julian's phone began to vibrate violently in his pocket. Then the phones of several other board members in the room began to chime simultaneously. Julian pulled out his device, his eyes widening as he stared at the red numbers cascading across the screen. He looked up at Elena, horror finally replacing his arrogance. "How did you know?" he whispered. Elena leaned in, her smile small and predatory. "Because I'm the one who placed the short orders against you." Before Julian could respond, a high-ranking board member pushed through the crowd, his face purple with rage. "Thorne, what the hell is happening? The firm is in a fail-frog." Elena stepped back, tucking her hand into Leo's arm. "Enjoy the keynote speech, Julian. I hear it's going to be a very short one." As they walked away, Elena felt the weight of Julian's stare on her back. It was the look of a man who realized he hadn't just lost a wife, he'd lost his empire. "That was move 1, Leo whispered, as they headed for the exit. "No," Elena said, looking towards the private elevator that led to the executive suites. "Move 1 was leaving. Now we're playing for the board." The air in the Thorne Capital boardroom was thick with the scent of expensive cologne and cold sweat. Julian sat at the head of the mahogany table, his tie loosened and his eyes red-shot. Around him, the board of directors looked like men facing a firing squad. In 48 hours, the firm's valuation had plummeted by billions. "We have one option left," the chairman said, his voice trembling. "The Obsidian Group has acquired 51% of our outstanding debt and a majority of the voting shares. They are the only ones who can provide the liquidity to keep us from total liquidation." Julian slammed his fist on the table. "I don't care who they are. Get them in here. If they want to own Thorne Capital, they have to deal with me." The heavy double doors at the end of the room swung open. Julian straightened his jacket, preparing his visionary CEO smile, but it froze on his face. Elena walked in. She wasn't alone. She was flanked by Leo Sterling and a team of 4 top-tier attorneys. She carried a sleek leather portfolio, her footsteps clicking with lethal precision on the marble floor. "What is this?" Julian barked, standing up so quickly his chair screeched. "Elena, I told you to stay away. This is a private board meeting for investors, not a playground for my ex-wife." Elena didn't stop until she reached the opposite end of the table. She placed her portfolio down and looked him directly in the eye. "You're right, Julian. This is for investors, which is why I'm here. I am the principal owner of the Obsidian Group." The room went silent. Julian let out a forced, hysterical laugh. "You? You don't have the intellect to run a lemonade stand, let alone a multi-billion-dollar holding company. Where did you get the money? Did you steal it from our joint accounts before the divorce?" "I didn't need your money, Julian. I had mine." She signaled to one of her lawyers, who opened a laptop and projected a line of code onto the wall-sized screen. "This is the Vortex algorithm. You told the world you wrote it. But these lines, specifically the hidden subroutines in the backend, carry a digital signature." She leaned forward. "They are signed by Vesper. That was my handle when I was 15, long before I met you. I didn't just write the code that built this company. I am the person who just foreclosed on it." Julian's face turned a sickly shade of gray. That's impossible. I am the architect of your success, Julian, and today I am the witness to your failure. She pulled a flash drive from her clutch and slid it across the table toward the board chairman. But I'm not just here for the company, I'm here for the truth. The chairman plugged in the drive. A video began to play. It was high-definition security footage from the gala's parking lot. The room watched in stunned silence as the screen showed Julian walking Jamie to the SUV, looking around nervously, and then locking the door with the child inside. They watched as he deliberately walked back to the gala, waited 40 minutes, and then slipped his own keys into Elena's purse when the police arrived. Julian's breath hitched. That's been doctored. It's a fake. It's the original file from the security server you thought you wiped. I've already handed a copy to the district attorney. They're waiting downstairs. The doors opened again. This time it was 2 detectives. They didn't look at the board. They walked straight to Julian. Julian Thorne, you are arrested for child endangerment, filing a false police report, and evidence tampering. As the handcuffs clicked into place, the same cold sound Elena had heard weeks ago, she didn't feel a surge of anger. She felt a profound, quiet peace. Julian looked at her, his eyes pleading, then filled with a desperate, impotent rage as he was led out of the room he once ruled. Elena turned back to the board. Gentlemen, Thorne Capital is dead. Tomorrow, this building will be rebranded as Vance Global. You have 1 hour to clear your desks. 2 hours later, the sun was setting over Central Park, painting the sky in hues of orange and gold. Elena sat on a bench watching Jamie run through the grass, chasing a golden retriever. He looked happy, healthy, and safe. A shadow fell over her. She looked up to see Leo Sterling standing there, 2 cups of coffee in his hands. He handed her one and sat down beside her. "So what's the first move for Vance Global?" Leo asked, watching her with a quiet smile. Elena took a sip of the coffee, feeling the warmth spread through her. She looked at her son, then at the city skyline where her name would soon be etched in light. "For the first time in 6 years," Elena said, her voice filled with a steady, unbreakable power, "I'm not thinking about the next move. I'm just enjoying the win." She leaned back, the invisible architect finally standing in the light of the empire she had built with her own hands. The debt was paid, the game was over, and for Elena Vance, life was just beginning.